For a century, the National Press Club has been the focal point of journalism in Washington. It is the one place where news gatherers and newsmakers can congregate for a neutral forum to get out information. We have thousands of press conferences, luncheons, and newsmakers that go on there every year, and it has been really for 100 years. We're having our centennial this year. It has been a really important Washington institution. But for our centennial, and because the news business is in such unusual circumstances right now, the club has asked me to go across the country and put on forums like this on the First Amendment, freedom of the press, and the future of journalism. And at every stop, I gather the leading local journalists and have them talk about where is this business going and how do we protect its core values. I want to thank the Ford Library for co-hosting this event. Of all the presidents in the past 40 years, Gerald Ford did the most for the National Press Club. And since in our first foray across the country, we wanted to make sure we came here to pay our respects. I also want to thank Aviva USA, which is an international insurance company that has our corporate sponsor for this. Aviva believes, as the National Press Club does, that a free press is essential to a free society and free enterprise.
First, let me say thank you to the National Press Club for inviting Aviva to be its private sector partner in the nationwide promotion of the NPC Centennial Forums. It's truly an honor for our company to be actively involved with the world's leading professional organization for journalists in this innovative public service and community education program. If the Aviva name isn't familiar to you, let me give you a little background on our company. We're the 5th largest insurance company in the world with 57,000 employees serving customers in 27 countries. It is a pleasure and a privilege for Aviva to be the NPC's exclusive corporate partner in sharing the Century of Headlines documentary with you. We have a long and proud history of social responsibility, support for our community, education, and forward thinking. Please enjoy.
Professional journalism's American epicenter is the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Located in the heart of our nation's capital, it is a home away from home and the office for print and broadcast journalists throughout the United States and from across the world. I'm a proud member of the National Press Club, and I have a lifetime of golden memories from my association with this fine institution and my colleagues in my chosen profession, journalism. The National Press Club celebrates its centennial in 2008, and to commemorate that landmark event, the club's Board of Governors has commissioned the production of an hour-long documentary and accompanying journalism educational materials. Its purpose is to capture for perpetuity the impact that the club, its members, its events and services have had on Americans, America, and our world. At a time when news gathering and delivery platforms are diversifying at an unprecedented pace, luminaries from the print and broadcast media share their career experiences and perspectives on the National Press Club and the future of journalism in the 21st century. I regard the National Press Club as a national treasure and a place of historic significance for our country. I know that the successes of its first 100 years have established a rock-solid foundation for the club's next century of commitment to excellence in journalism. So enjoy this preview of the NPC 100 documentary, and please join me in supporting the National Press Club's mission.
If one wanted to find a place in Washington, D.C., the capital of a great country, where journalism comes together with all of the people who make power, who represent power, if you need one place, you need the National Press Club.
It's very appropriate that the National Press Club is located on 14th Street at the intersection of 14th and F, right near Pennsylvania Avenue, because that was the hub of really the first conclave of Washington journalists. There really hadn't been many Washington reporters here before the Civil War. But when the Civil War started in 1861, everybody wanted to cover the war.
The National Press Club was founded in 1908, and I'd like to tell you that it was founded for some lofty journalistic reason, like defense of the First Amendment. But the fact of the matter is, the club was founded because in 1908, the bars in Washington closed at midnight.
As soon as the National Press Club got established, presidents started showing up. William Howard Taft, who was not fond of the press corps, didn't really like reporters, dutifully came over to the National Press Club when it was established. But the man who really was ideal for the press and who really fit the National Press Club was Warren G. Harding. He saw himself as a member of the club, and he was an honorary member of the club, as presidents have been since then.
Well, I was a distant observer when Harry Truman was playing the piano there at the Press Club, and Lauren Bacall was seated up there on the top with the right amount of leg. It was rather shocking to the public at that time because that was considered to be quite an indecent amount of leg. But as you look at it today, it doesn't seem so indecent. And he invited Lauren Bacall to come and join him. He didn't invite her to jump up on the top of the piano. That was her own invention. But it turned out to be one of the most stunning photographs that was ever recorded at the National Press Club.
Well, the National Press Club, like other institutions over the years, was segregated by gender and by race, as were the American media and other major American institutions. But what's interesting to me is that the Press Club, like the Gridiron Club and other institutions in Washington that are press-related and all, let blacks in before it let women in. Which says something about different levels of bias in our society and not just our society.
Everyone wanted to attend the luncheon with Khrushchev because it was a new phenomenon that there's even the possibility that the United States could suddenly develop less hostility in the Cold War with the Soviet Union. This seemed to be a real breakthrough, and everybody in Washington, whether you were in the press or you were a lobbyist or a lawmaker or anything, wanted to be at that luncheon. So we all knew that it was a very dramatic time and a very important speech that Khrushchev would be delivering. But he was not as conciliatory as we had bargained for. And he did say, "We will bury you," which was the memorable line out of that address. And it haunted us in a way because we then knew that he had thrown down the gauntlet and that there was a real contest between the two forms of government.
Presidents began to use the National Press Club as their exit from Washington. And LBJ decided that that's where he would go to make his last speech in Washington, or his almost last speech. And so by this time, humor became essential. I mean, presidents began to recognize more and more that laughter was what the press would remember.
And on another occasion, I remember, well, I guess you were more accurate, I did show my scar. But I think an explanation you ought to know that it was only after a question from Sarah McClendon. And she said, "Mr. President, you've been in office almost 2 years, and what do you have to show for it?"
On January the 2nd, 1980, we covered our first National Press Club luncheon with Paul Volcker. And we haven't missed any since then. There have been several thousand luncheons and speakers. And we've dedicated ourselves to covering them all. Covering the National Press Club luncheon speeches has always been one of my favorite things because there are rare opportunities in the society on a national basis for an individual to get up and give a full speech on their terms, not on anybody else's terms. And it's one of the great things that people do, have to get up and motivate and inform.
At breakfast time, lunchtime, all through the day, there are events going on there that appeal to a whole range of interests.
And I think that in 50% of the stories that announce an anonymous source in the first paragraph, that person will be identified sometime later in the story.
You have to supply the outrage. We'll supply the facts. That's the nature of journalism in a democratic society.
When you go interview somebody, they take themselves seriously. So if you come in and say, you know, Hubbs, that article you wrote for Foreign Affairs in 1982, on page 97, you said the following, and I was just wondering exactly what you meant. Right. Now, do you think he's going to remember what he wrote? Oh, yes, he will. Because he takes himself seriously.
On behalf of the Newsmakers Committee today, I'd like to introduce today's newsmaker. He is actor, director, and Academy Award winner George Clooney. Mr. Clooney comes to us today straight off a trip this week from the Sudan. We'd like to turn now to hear his personal response to what he witnessed on the ground in Darfur. Please help me welcome George Clooney.
Thank you very much. 5 days ago, my father and I were on the border of Chad and Darfur. We were watching the refugees spilling into the camps some 2 years after President Bush and Colin Powell officially declared these atrocities genocide.
A chill is descending on Washington, and it has nothing to do with this endless winter. It's the chill on news gathering that has begun to affect the everyday work of journalists covering the nation's capital. A summer of headline writing, subpoenas, and threats of jail and fines against journalists is taking a toll on reporting, even as journalists repeatedly refuse to reveal the names of their confidential sources.
Even though I know I don't want to go to jail, and I know Matt doesn't, as the father of a young child, I think that there is a principle that's so important here at stake that we have to be willing to do that.
We got Robert Novak, truth to tell. He knew Calvin Coolidge very well. Novak leaked his secret tale, and Judith Miller went to jail.
News leaks are as American as cherry pie. They are a part of the process. In a totalitarian society, there is only one source of news. In a democracy, you have a second source, and that is the version that is produced by a free press. A citizen can then check the government version against the version he gets from the press and decide which one that he or she wants to believe. If there were no other reason for having a free press, that alone would be reason enough.
My wishes to the press club are 100 more years of activity so that we can be assured that the press in Washington will always be as alert as it is today, as dedicated as it is today, as fundamental as we all know it to be to the workings of our democracy.
Okay, now, before we get to our panel, we're going to do something we've never done on this tour. I would like to introduce Dick Ryan, who was the Detroit News Washington correspondent for nearly 40 years and president of the club in 2001. And Dick knew Gerald Ford quite well, and he will give us a short presentation on the president, the press, and the National Press Club. Dick?
Thank you. Since this event is being held at the Ford Library, I thought it was quite appropriate that we say something about the president. As Elaine mentioned earlier, the president had a great relationship with the press club. He was there 16 times, 15 times to give out the award for press reporting on the presidency and on national defense. But he appeared there once as a president of the United States, and that was in October of 1975 when he showed up to tell everybody that he wasn't about to bail out New York City. And as you may remember, that speech resulted in the infamous headline that it was reported in the New York Daily News, "Ford to City, drop dead." Ford later told Tom DeFrank, who has chronicled many conversations he had with the president afterwards, that that headline should actually have read that he saved the city because he forced the city into fiscal discipline that brought it out of its bankruptcy. There has always been a warm and friendly relationship between the president and the press. Mr. Ford, as he was quick to point out, was a Ford and not a Lincoln, so he was never very flashy. He never had a quick soundbite. But he was usually honest, forthcoming, and above all else, at least as far as we in the press were concerned, he was accessible and willing to talk to us. As a vice president, he held almost a press conference every day. The president, and Mr. Nixon at that time, was holding one about once every 9 months. When I first came to Washington in 1969, I was really astounded at how easy it was to have access to Gerald Ford, who was then the House Minority Leader. He actually had his phone number listed in the local telephone directory. So you could just look it up, call him up. I dare you to try to find any congressman or even one of their aides today who has a phone number listed in the directory. One of the fondest memories I have of President Ford, and I have written this in the paper, was in October 1973 when President Nixon totally unexpectedly picked him to be his vice president. That was to replace Spiro Agnew. After the East Room announcement, and that was about 9 o'clock at night, I drove out to Mr. Ford's house in suburban Virginia. Secret Service had already set up security, and so I went up to the Secret Service agent, I gave my card. I said, would you please just ask Mr. Ford if he would come out and talk to me? A few minutes later, the agent came out and he said, go on in. The president said, or the vice president then, the vice president named, would be willing to talk to you. I can still remember sitting there with Ford, and that night he was sitting in a blue leather chair, as I recall. I think it may have even been Naugahyde at that time. He was sipping a drink, as he used to do back in those days. Susan, his daughter, was sitting on the couch nearby. Betty was in the next room talking to all her friends. I think there was a cat and dog scampering around there someplace. At the end of that conversation, the president said to me that, well, next weekend I have to go to Red Flannel Day in Grand Rapids. Now, I had no idea what Red Flannel Day in Grand Rapids is. I still don't know what that is. But the president said he had to go there. He may be the newly named vice president, but he was still the congressman from Grand Rapids. I also had the opportunity to interview the president aboard Air Force One. He was flying to Detroit in the 1976 presidential campaign, and he invited me to his cabin. And he later sent me a photograph of that interview, in which he inscribed on it to Dick Ryan, a good friend and a fine reporter. Best wishes, Jerry Ford. Obviously, that hung on my office wall until I retired, and now it hangs in my office at home. And I dare say, I think there's a whole lot of reporters in Washington and Michigan who have similar photographs on their walls. Ford, as you know, had many friends among the press corps. At the press club had a celebration for the president the last time he appeared at the press club, and it was his 90th birthday. And at that celebration, many people who had covered President Ford spoke. And this is what CBS Washington correspondent Bob Schieffer, who we just saw in that film, said about the president. This may not be considered significant, what I'm about to say here, because it will be less than 16 words. And I know now that for something to be significant, it's got to be more than 16 words. I'll just say this. Gerald Ford was the nicest and most decent person I ever covered. Mr. President, we love you. I think that was a sentiment shared by a large number of the press at that time. But the reporters who covered Ford were also well aware that he didn't always like what they wrote about him. He was not above grousing about any story that you might have written. If he didn't like it, if he thought it was unfair, or if he just said, don't write about that for me. I think he might have mentioned a couple of things about that to me a time or two. And in his eulogy for Ford, President Ford, at the National Cathedral last year, Tom Brokaw, who covered the president at the White House, said this about the president, that he understood the role and the job of the press in our society today. And he said, this is quoting Brokaw, we could be adversaries, but we were never his enemy. And that was a welcome change in the status from his predecessor's time. And just yesterday, we saw the new tapes that came out from President Nixon, who was talking to Henry Kissinger, and he's quoted as saying twice, The press is our enemy. The press is our enemy. President Ford always felt strongly about the press and the role it does play in society. When you Seide, the Time magazine writer who covered the White House for 50 years, died, Ford wrote an op-ed piece for the Washington Post. Only a couple of months earlier, Ford had asked Seide to be a eulogist at his funeral when he should die, but Seide obviously preceded the president. Ford wrote in that op-ed page piece, he said, I like reporters. Even if I haven't always liked what some wrote about me, I figure that's a pretty minor price to pay for a free press in a free society. So at age 90, at his last appearance at the National Press Club, Ford had this to say about the press.
To the strengthening of our country, our founding fathers had that vision when they included the press in the First Amendment to the Constitution. Journalists provide the people of our great nation the information, vision, strength that has resulted in the unprecedented advancement in freedom of all of our life. Our national moral strength is due in no small part to the significance of their contribution.
Now, a topic wherever journalists gather, whether it's the National Press Club bar or the White House press room or the Senate Press Gallery or I'm sure any number of watering holes around Detroit, is where the heck is this news business going? The bad news just keeps coming at us. Newspaper after newspaper has announced round after round of news staff cutbacks. Washington bureaus have been dropping like, toppling like dominoes lately. It's just astounding. I'm afraid to go back to town. There's nobody left to talk to anymore. Venerable publications like the Christian Science Monitor and the U.S. News and World Report have announced that they're going to stop publication on paper and be completely online. There's just all kinds of bad news coming out. Tom Curley, the president of the Associated Press, said at one of our forums, he says that what used to be very difficult times for the news media has now turned into a fight for survival as the economy has collapsed. There's a sense of lost purpose among some reporters. Are we still the watchdog of government? Is there a threat to the First Amendment and freedom of press? On the other hand, this is also a time of tremendous innovation. Stories that appear in the Detroit News or the Detroit Free Press now can be seen around the world at the touch of a button. There are probably more readers for what you all write now, if you look at online and in print, than there have ever been. There are all kinds of new ways of telling a story, whether it's using webcasts or blogs or I've never seen reporters so excited as when they talked about their Twitters. This is all the rage. Now, this is something that has come up just in the last year, Twittering. Everybody's Twittering, Lord knows. One of our panelists said this could be the golden age of journalism. You could just find a way to pay for it. Tom Rosenstiel, the well-known press critic, said at one of our forums, he looked out at students in the audience and he said, you students are the lucky ones. When we went through journalism school, we were taught, if you do it like your elders did it, you'll be doing fine. But the students today are going to be reinventing journalism, and that is an exciting thing. But it's up to us, the elders of the business, to make sure that they understand the mission of journalism, why we are doing this, and what are the standards and the ethics that undergird the business. Now, we have a journalism, where is journalism heading in Michigan? We have a distinguished panel, to say the least. It's just unbelievable. Jonathan Wollman is editor and publisher of the Detroit News, a position he's held since 2007. He worked for 31 years with the Associated Press, where he served as Washington Bureau Chief, Managing Editor, and Executive Editor. Retiring from the AP in 2004, he was a Senior Vice President and Editorial Page Editor of the Denver Post before moving to the Detroit News. As the AP's Executive Editor, John was responsible for AP news coverage and editorial standards around the world. Marla Drutz is a Vice President and General Manager of WDIV-TV in Detroit, a position she had held since last July. She came to Local 4 after 19 years at WXYZ-TV, where she was Director of Programming and Special Projects for the EW Scripps Company. Omari Gardner is News Director for Digital Media at the Detroit Free Press. He joined the Free Press's copy desk in 1999 after working as a copy editor at the Tallahassee Democrat. He became Assistant Business Editor in 2005 and joined the web department the next year when the Free Press began growing its digital operation in earnest. And Vincent Duffy is the news director at Michigan Public Radio, a post he has held since May 2007. In his first year leading the newsroom, his news team won more than 36 national, regional, and state awards for a month-long series investigating education in Michigan. After graduating from Kent State, he covered news in Australia, Switzerland, and South Africa as a radio journalist. He was on the news team at WILL at the University of Illinois and was news director at WKSU at Kent State. He also hosted a weekly public television show and has done television documentaries. So now let's throw out the first question, and I want to get this out to everyone and start a real dialogue going here. Now, at a time when the news business is undergoing rapid changes and major cutbacks, Detroit and Michigan have been the center of a huge breaking story with the auto industry. Now, has your coverage of this story suffered because of the cutbacks, and how have you approached it differently because of the changes in the news media? Who would like to start? John, you've got some thoughts on that? Or?
Well, this is a little bit of a story of a lifetime trying to chronicle the travails of the auto industry for us in Detroit and Michigan. I think that the difficulties we're having in our own newsrooms with resources have not really limited our coverage of the big story. In fact, we have thrown lots of resources at this in Detroit and across the world, and this week in particular in Washington. Does it cause a strain? You know it does. The dominance that the story has for our community could hardly be exaggerated. So we just keep throwing our folks into the fray, and we'll see the story perhaps reach a crescendo in the next week. And I'm pretty sure that all of us at the table would say that we're ready to cover that story, and almost literally whatever it takes.
I'm used to the microphone being right here in radio, and nobody gets to take it away. For public radio, there are a number of cutbacks that are going around in the news industry, but for whatever reason, and a lot of it could be because we're a nonprofit, but we are not yet being hit with that. Our audience has doubled in the past 10 years. Membership hasn't, but the audience has, and so there are some benefits to that. So we have not really had to face cutbacks in covering the automobile story. Where we do suffer, still in relation to the newspapers, is that our newsroom is significantly smaller, even after cutbacks, than the major dailies and even some of the smaller newspapers. So we do not have as many reporters here in Detroit to cover the situation. We do have a very good relationship with our network in Washington, D.C., and we have reporters at Michigan Radio who file regularly for the network, so we've been able to partner with them. The people there covering what's going on in Congress, and our reporters here covering what's going on at the factories and on the streets and in the communities. But you asked on how things have changed and ways that we're covering things different. One of the things that we have done this time is, because of the internet and because of email, we have made our coverage of the decline of the auto industry and its impact on the community interactive. And we actually went on the radio and also put on our website and asked people. We said, how are you being affected? What's going on with you or your community? Tell us your story. And we were surprised at the huge number of emails that we got. We had to eventually take the announcement on the radio down because we were inundated. But we've been going through those emails and picking out representative stories and then sending reporters out and just sitting down with people at their kitchen tables or wherever they might be and letting them tell their story. And then we cut them down. We can't give them a half an hour, but we give them 4, 5, maybe 6 minutes just to tell their story of how the decline in the auto industry is affecting their life on the radio station. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it would not have been possible. We would have the old-fashioned way of going out to the diners or to the union halls or wherever and trying to find people. But now it's much easier to connect with the audience in an interactive way because we can just say on the air or on the website, hey, if you have something that's interesting you think other people would like to know, let us know, and then we can go through, call that out, and interview people.
Just to piggyback on points that were made before, yes, I'm sorry, can you hear me? Okay. Our resources are strained, but the auto industry coverage it's just our top priority. We have to make it our top priority, and we have to divert resources if we have people who are who in the business department or the auto team, all hands on deck. We also have people from other departments, from our features or our local news departments, who will help get tell the stories of the people who are affected by this. It's not just a business story, it's a community story. And just to also piggyback on a point of interaction, we learn a lot just by reading our forums when we post our stories. We've never had better access to our community than we do now, and vice versa, our community have access to us. Of course, it's up to us in the press to make sure that we have a continuous dialogue between the community and ourselves. We put our phone numbers and we put our email addresses on our stories, and our reporters are getting better and better. It's an ongoing process, but they're getting better interacting with the community. But what also has changed probably from the way this story would have been covered, say 10 years ago, is that now there's an expectation from our readership, and us providing a service, we give news as we learn it. It's instantaneous, it's constant, and I think we have a responsibility to fulfill by giving people the information that they need quickly and accurately, and that's one of the challenges that the industry is going through. It's because we've done this at a ponderous pace, but what our readership is going to expect has changed, and for us to provide the service that we're supposed to, we need to be fast and we need to get it right.
Marla, what do you think?
Last night, I'm good with the remote control. I really could get a PhD in that. And when I watched the 11 p.m. news across the stations in the Detroit markets, everyone basically led with the same story. And that was the story of the UAW calling an emergency meeting today at the Renaissance Center at the GM headquarters. And during that story, it was made that this meeting would take place at approximately 10 o'clock in the morning, between 10 and 11. If you turned on television between 10 and 11 o'clock, all major television stations in the Metro Detroit area were running lower third crawls that said, as soon as the UAW meeting begins, we're going to bring you live coverage of it. And the UAW meeting didn't begin much before probably about 10 to 12 today. Ron Gettelfinger really didn't start to speak until about 12:30. So from a coverage side, we had tremendous coverage, and it was local coverage, so from an expense side, it wasn't tremendous. It starts to get expensive today when Rod Maloney travels to Washington, D.C. to cover the hearings, of course, in D.C., and I assure you every television station in Detroit is sending their business writer there. Where it starts to get even more expensive, though, is at 12:30 in the afternoon when we should be in jeopardy. And instead, we're in the Gettelfinger speech. So I have a problem that these gentlemen don't have. The problem I have that's a little unique is if Gettelfinger speaks at 11:30, it doesn't impact in all likelihood probably the advertisements that will run in the next day's Detroit Free Press or Detroit News. And you're maybe the most fortunate man on the panel in some ways. From our side, we have
But the least paid.
Well, I can't speak to that. But I can tell you ours is a little bit of a double-edged sword to the extent that we have the expense of the coverage, which is necessary and important, and yet at the same time, when the coverage then starts to occur outside of normal news hours, we have the expense of lost commercials with it. So in regards to how it's impacting us, it's definitely impacting our bottom line. And let me just say one thing, though. One of the things we've really noticed as this story has taken on such tremendous significance is that the ratings for everybody as it relates to news, and by that I mean the commercial over-the-air stations in Detroit, are up. We estimate probably someplace around 15%. Now, we can't monetize that to charge more because it's too quick of a turnaround, but it's clear to me, quite clear, that people are sampling right now, and people who are maybe not traditional news viewers are really coming to television to get news and to see live press conferences like today with Ron Gettelfinger. So I think it's probably more important than ever for us to be really mindful of that, because we have an opportunity, really in my mind, to bring back some of the lost viewers, if you would, who through the years have migrated to other places to get news. And it's really one of the sort of rare pluses that we get when a local news story like this occurs, and that is that we become the local outlet for that, and that has great significance to viewers.
Omari, you had something to add there.
Yeah, just to also piggyback on that point as well, you know, on what we're seeing on our website, ever since January, with the combination of the auto show, the Kwame Kilpatrick story, and the Michigan primaries, that our readership is as big as it's ever been online. We have just done amazing with between a redesign and between all the news that's broken. You know, we have a nationwide audience now, which is what we didn't have before. And what we've learned is that people want to see what we're reporting, and they also want to see what people are saying about the news that's going on. So we know the demand is out there, but of course the dilemma is monetizing it.
And that's where I think there's so many ways to go here, but that is the next question I wanted to get into. The problem is not the lack of interest in the news. The problem is the advertising model. And even for television, I was hearing that once this election was over, there's going to be a big drop in revenue. What are advertisers telling you? Are they telling you that they're no longer interested in the mainstream media, or are they saying, don't worry, we'll be back if the economy ever comes back? John, you want to start that off? You're the publisher.
The advertisers are as confused about the transformation of media as anyone else. They are as excited as we are about moving into the digital side and being available in the interactive universe. Yet, when we talk about monetizing that, the going rate for advertising on the digital platforms is, some fraction, maybe 1/8 of the same advertising in newsprint, and we've seen terrific traffic online, and we've enjoyed a increase in advertising activity. And I'd love to be able to say that that's been that increase has really contributed to the support of the newsroom, and I can say that. Can I say that it has replaced the lost advertising from the newspaper itself? Not even close, and that speaks to the distress that newspaper organizations have seen in the decline in advertising revenue. Double digits declines for all the big city papers in the country this past year. So that's been a headache. Omari is exactly right. Monetizing the increase in traffic online, advertisers typically buy inventory, and when we see a huge boost in traffic, it means the inventory has been used up on the 15th of the month, not the 25th of the month. But there isn't a flood of new revenue coming in to fill that space. We're seeing improvement. Those numbers continue to go up. They've gone up online advertising revenue this past year. in a gratifying way, but here again, the business model doesn't see a shift from one platform to the next. It sees a decline in one platform and a small increase in the next platform.
Marla, what are you seeing for television?
Well, you're seeing this. If you watch TV consistently, about 1 out of every 4 commercials is for a car. You saw the announcement yesterday. Lowest car sales in 25 years, and not just American brands, Toyota, Honda as well. And that's been a seismic hit for us, I have to be perfectly honest. Now, there are some ways we're making it up, and yes, online efforts are tremendous, but as John points out, it's a fraction to the dollar in terms of the revenue that we generate. I think that the challenge that we have, honestly, right now is that we don't really know how long this is going to last. It would be one thing if you had to develop a strategy to survive for a year, knowing that a category that represents 1 out of every $4 is basically going away. And think about your own budgets. If you knew that 25% was going away, it'd be one thing to be able to figure out a strategy to make it through for 1 year. It's another thing to think about a strategy that would be a long-term strategy. And I think what we're grappling with right now is what this, not what it means, but how long will it last? I was discouraged, to be honest with you, before I came today. I had on CNN, don't tell anyone, but just for a minute. And former President Clinton was on, and the lower third crawl underneath it that said what he was saying, said that he thinks that it's probably going to turn around within 3 years. And I have to tell you, if it's going to take 3 years for it to turn around, I think that the face of media is going to change pretty dramatically. So I would like to believe the estimates that I've heard that suggest that maybe second quarter 2010 is the turnaround year. The president of Nissan said the other day that mobility is not negotiable, and that as soon as the economy starts to stabilize a little bit, people will want to buy cars. And, you know, in thinking about it, that seems intuitively true, that we know, you probably know, I know people whose leases are up or cars have got 100,000 miles on them or what have you. I think that there will be a turnaround in cars maybe a little quicker than we might see at other places. But is that a turnaround that's going to take place in 2009? I'm afraid not. I mean, I think we can hold on. I just honestly don't know how we'll be able to hold on at the levels of staffing that we have, at the levels of spending that we have, if this goes on for more than a year.
We talk about changing the face of the news business. Let's talk about that. How does everybody see it? Now, one thing we hear about is, okay, the newspapers are all going online and they've got video, and the television stations, they're going online and they're writing news, and you in print, and your radio is doing print and video. Is there room for everybody to do what everybody else is doing? Or are we going to see, in Salt Lake City, the TV guy says, you're not going to see 4 TV stations and 2 newspapers in 5 years.
I think it depends on how you want to define media. I mean, the blogosphere is growing daily, and I don't know how many people produce a blog that only a dozen people read, but it's out there. In terms of what, I don't know whether public radio is considered mainstream media or not. It might depend upon where you are politically, but but for the purposes of this, we'll call ourselves the mainstream media up here. There is, I think, going to be a hashing out of that. We have seen in Cleveland 2 competing TV stations combine their newsroom. We've seen small newspapers in communities in Michigan combining all of their print production and copy stuff in Grand Rapids. There is, I think, going to be some media, there will be some media that will not survive the current economic situation. And that isn't all just because of the current economic situation, it's been coming. So where will people go to get their news afterwards? I don't know. I think that we hopefully are all planning on surviving. But you do see newspapers across the country drastically cutting their repertorial staff. Gannett had a huge cut across the country today. The Plain Dealer let 27 people go yesterday. And the concern that I have with that then is that we we in public radio are doing well, and we can continue to tell you stories. And as you said, we have the website, and so we're doing so much more now. Radio reporters have to spell correctly so that we can put the text on our website. All of our radio reporters are carrying little Canon PowerShot cameras, and we're taking video or pictures, and so we're learning how to do that and put it on the website. So there are stories there. But what we don't have that I think will really miss with the decline of some of the newspapers is those media of record. As good a job as we can do telling narrative stories in public radio, as fantastic a job as television can do covering spectacle and giving you fantastic visuals and presenting live situations, we don't have the staffs to cover the Detroit City Council meeting, the Ann Arbor City Council meeting, the Wayne County Commissioners meeting, the Fowlerville Library Board, every single time they meet like a newspaper can. And the concern that I have is that's what, as a society, we're going to end up missing. So we have all these bells and whistles, and it's going to look great on the web, but who's going to be the person with that professional background, and we can debate whether or not that's necessary with citizen journalism, but who's going to be there, covering those events?
And that gets us to the newspaper people. We have heard this in Chicago. The publisher of the Chicago Sun-Times says, without the newspaper newsroom, the whole model, the whole news business collapses because it's the newspaper newsroom that provides the real grounding for information. But I'll let our newspaper people talk about that.
Well, if you want something to worry about, I think this is just as good a place to start as any. You can look across the country and you can see some big cities that are in danger of losing their anchor newspaper. And I don't want to be the one predicting that that'll happen in one location or another, but I have to agree that a prolonged recession with any number of, let's say, half a dozen newspapers facing such distress, and you worry that there'll be a community without an anchor newspaper. I think several communities, smaller communities in Connecticut, are operating under, if you will, the risk that the owner of the newspaper is going to shut down those papers if they can't meet a certain expense level. And of course, it goes without saying that in the long run, news organizations are commercial enterprises that have to turn a buck. It's absolutely true that in the setup that we have enjoyed over the last 50 years, there's been a symbiosis between newspapers and television and radio and now the internet, and that the bedrock coverage has always come from the newspapers. And they enjoyed a larger staff, and they had the broader reach into not only the different levels of government, which is huge and not to be taken for granted, but entertainment and sports and business community and all of the different activities that create our community. So we see that this kind of distress in the news business can have a terrible repercussion if the business model doesn't get lined up. And I know lots of people who are working lots of hours to get this business model tucked away and have a certain amount of optimism and confidence that that'll happen, but the days do tick off. Vince's version of the day's events exactly right. The closing of the Cox Bureau in Washington, which was announced yesterday, and some of the Cox newspapers are for sale, and you do wonder where it'll end. And when the music stops, where the reporting will take place that contributes, the most fundamental coverage to all of the outlets represented at this table, certainly, and all of the outlets among our many colleagues.
Omari, you got something out on that?
Yeah, I guess one of the dangers that this financial situation also has for our industry is that the industry has been cutting a lot of its staff, and it's been a lot of its staff with more experience. So what a lot of newsrooms are left with are younger workers who are eager, but they don't have sort of the seasoned veterans to help shepherd them along, to help teach them the tricks of the trade, because that knowledge is gone now. If anybody's enterprise, and they'll maintain a relationship with those folks, but there's not that same institutional knowledge that it takes to do what we do. It's a very challenging thing when you lose a veteran reporter who's been on the beat for 30 years, and then the next person who's ready to step up doesn't quite have the same repartee with the with their sources, so it's not just just cutbacks on capital spending, on salaries. You're cutting in a knowledge industry. You have to invest in knowledge, and that's part of the challenge that we're facing. Those who are most knowledgeable make the most money. So when the bean counters are looking to cut staff, they're usually the first to be in line for buyouts. That's one of the challenges, one of the major challenges that this industry is facing, is how do we maintain a credible reputation when there's not that passing along of knowledge within the industry.
So many ways to go here. Omari, the technology tells you what stories people are interested in.
Absolutely.
At our Chicago forum, we had the counterpart of yours from the Tribune say that they do keep track, of course, of what are the most popular stories. And I asked him what is the most popular story, and he said, animal stories. Now the question then arises, how much does that influence how you send your reporters out to do?
I can share a little bit of information about some of how we approach what we do in the paper. When we meet every day, the first discussion is what's on the website and what is being read on the website. We know that, this is kind of ironic. Jim Schaefer, who was one of the reporters on the Columbia Kilpatrick story, said he thought that story would die after a couple of days. Needless to say, our web traffic said otherwise, and here we are today. But it certainly, because before we could sort of guess from what our friends say, what our friends talk to us about is what they read and what they're interested in, and we don't have to guess anymore. Because we do have up to the second data on how many page views a story gets, how many people are coming to our site, how many people have left the site from a page, how many people have found a story through a Google search engine. We have very, very sophisticated information on what people read, and sometimes you never know what that sports will do well in Detroit, especially if it's the Lions, especially if it's the Wolverines and Terrell Pryor. We know that auto stories do well. Not every wild auto story does well, but many of them do. We know that any stories about anything that has to do with corruption in the city of Detroit will do well. And I think we were starting to tailor our product more toward that very specific intelligence that we get from our web readership.
Anybody else want to jump in on that aspect there? There are, at our University of Missouri forum, we had the bureau chief from the St. Louis paper who said, he's blogging, he's Twittering, he's working hard, he's doing all they ask for him, but he doesn't see where that is saving one newsroom job and it's burning him out. And that was the theme of kind of the University of Missouri was, you're demanding so much of your reporters now, you're going to burn them out. Anybody want to, John, you look like you had something to say on that.
Well, we talk all the time about whether or not this wealth of information is actionable intelligence. And you love to think that it is, and occasionally, it's something that hits you across the face like a 2x4. Other times you walk in and discover that you've spent so much time and effort on a major project that you think fits a bill for popularity, and you walk in and it's a Red Wings headline, and there's a moment of deflation, and then you realize that service to the community involves sports and entertainment as well as autos in City Hall. We've had the bizarre, we've had the bizarre fact that at the conversation that Omari mentions first thing in the morning where we're reviewing web traffic, our most popular item for the last 5 days, days that have been historic for coverage of the auto industry, have included a video piece that we produced more than a year ago from Brazil when a team went down and did a extensive project on a Ford Motor Company plant that has the most modern footprint and defies some of the limitations that are put upon the industry in the United States by the company's relationship with the United Auto Workers. We're talking about a video piece that was produced and put on our website more than a year ago. And we're sitting here in December 2008, and it fits into the coverage of the changes, the changing face of the auto industry. Very unusual to say the least, and the next day we'll walk in and the census from the overnight internet will tell us that that story's in the top 5 once again.
I was going to comment that for broadcast or local television stations, one of the top 3 items all the time is weather. And I'm thinking of tonight, for example, that many people use. I think that it's like sometimes it's not a tough transaction in people's mind to think of broadcast and then to think of weather, because if you think about it, we have literally millions of dollars worth of equipment that sits in our newsroom, not just us, but stations across the country. And when you think about, if you added up the minutes that weather is on in a 24-hour period on most television stations, I would tell you that it's less than a half an hour if you took the amount of time in every newscast. And yet you've got literally millions of dollars worth of equipment. So one of the ways that I think that the web has been especially helpful is that it helps you monetize and actually amortize the cost of equipment like weather equipment. Because if we know that that's a major place where people will come to our website to see weather, it makes a decision about hiring more meteorologists or maybe bringing additional producers in or buying new equipment a little easier of a decision to make. For television, the other huge place that people come is to watch videos. And it's really funny, it's interesting that we all have the same meeting in the morning, which is that meeting that is usually, it used to be the old meeting where it was really about the newscast, and now our meeting leads with web too. And for us, and I'm sure many TV stations, it sounds crazy, but it's weird news. And you've probably seen it on a lot of websites, and it can be local, and many times it's national or even international. And that tends to be one of the top 4. And anytime you have a local story, a Kwame Kilpatrick who pushes a police officer and there's an interview from a witness next door, that's the kind of thing that you can just absolutely see the numbers spiral. I mean, they just absolutely top out. But I would say day in, day out, weather is an enormous contributor to our web traffic.
I just want to touch on the burnout part of your question, because I think this is happening, I'm not so sure about in print media, but I know in electronic media, every time there's a new technological ability to do something, our bosses say, that's great, do that too. Yeah, okay, so we are, in the past, we would do a radio story and we would produce the story and you would hear the story on the air. And it took us longer to do it because we had to cut and splice tape. So digitizing it makes it faster. But now we have to do the radio version of that story. Then for production reasons and for how long it stays on the shelf, we have to do a web version that has some time elements taken out. Then we have to do the print version on the web, which requires us to rewrite because you don't want to have in text the way that we talk on the air. Dangling attributions have to be added and things like that. I'll bore you with that. But anyway, it's a lot more work. And then we have to put our pictures on, and then we have to maybe put a promo on the website. And now they're talking about whether or not we're going to Twitter this stuff. And what happens is you have reporters that are running ragged with no more resources, no more time, no more pay, but they're expected to do a lot more in their day. And what suffers then is the reporting, because there's that much less time that reporters can spend background checking, calling maybe a third person to check a source, calling back for an update, because management assumes that the story that you put down is correct. I'm the news director. I hope that when they give me the story, I don't have to fact check everything, that the reporters know what they're doing. But then what we're counting is, is it on the web? Did you get a picture? Did you get do you have enough pictures that we can do a slideshow? Do you have a video? Can you blog about it? Can you put a Twitter out about it? When what we should be doing sometimes is making sure that the story is right, and then we go back and advance the story or improve the story. So there is this burnout, and it's even worse for friends that I have in television, because they're often, next cast, go out, get the tape, and you find people with stand-ups that haven't had time to talk to anybody because they're doing a stand-up for the local station, and then 5 minutes later they're doing a stand-up on a big story for CNN if they're an affiliate, and then 20 minutes later they're on again for their next newscast, and so it's just go, go, go.
Yeah, I would just respond one way, though. I think that it's management's job to know what the readership, viewership, the amount of eyeballs that are that are watching or reading. In other words, to do what you just suggested, where you're running ragged, and if no one is reading the blog, or if no one is really looking at the slideshow, and these are matrix and numbers that we know, then I say shame on management, because that's a bad use of a resource. It would be just as bad for that resource to drive 175 miles to get a story that they could get around the corner than it would be to really do what you're talking about. And I think it does occur, I don't doubt that at all, but I think that's where it's a really important role for managers to manage and to say, wait, the return on investment isn't worth what we're going to end up doing not to get the follow-up story, not to make sure that we're as accurate as we need to be. So, I hear what you're saying. I would say they need to do a better job of managing.
I think that's born, out of the desperation of, in the newspaper business, we have the same issues where, okay, you say we got something breaking. Okay, you got to write a story within 5 minutes. That's 2 or 3 sentences. Once something breaks, and then got to go back and report. And then you got somebody screaming at the reporter, "Hey, have you updated that for the web?" And then we got to shoot a video interview with you. Oh yeah, we got to shuttle you out to Channel 4. To do a TV review. Oh, we got to shoot photographs for this. Oh, we got to do a video, and then sometimes we don't sit back and evaluate exactly what the return on that investment is. And then you have reporters who just become absolutely burnt out. And we do need to more strategically pick our battles on what we need to do, what will attract eyeballs.
Great. Now, I know people want to get out of here because of the weather, so I want to start moving this to, no, don't get up and leave now. It's not icing yet. We've got another 20 minutes. I want to open it up to people who want to ask questions. There's a microphone back here. While you're all standing up there, I'm going to ask one more question here. Let's turn to freedom of information. At many of these forums, I've heard that because the government knows that the news media don't have the deep pockets that they used to fight for freedom of information, that they're being more secretive, and that in investigative reporting that news organizations are a little loath to promise sources that we will defend them to the death because the death gets real expensive. What are you seeing the government being more secretive, and is there a problem because of the changes in the news media on freedom of information and the First Amendment?
I can't really speak with true authority on this. I can only speak from my limited experience with witnessing what happened with the Kilpatrick stuff. I think we did have a little bit of resistance in getting that information. But I think we thought it was worth fighting for. I don't know how much it cost us, so I really don't want to speak out of turn. but I'm pretty sure it wasn't. I'm pretty sure it wasn't cheap.
We didn't.
Oh, go ahead.
We let them buy it. It was $500. It was $1 a page to get those text messages, and the first time they came out, it was upwards of $500. And I was out of town, but my reporter called me and said, "Can I spend that money?" And I said, "No." And it's not fair, but I said, "The papers will buy it, and they'll put it online within half an hour. We can wait because but those resource issues are there. The law allows them to charge what the law says is a reasonable amount, and we could take them to court and say $1 a page for a 500-page document is not a reasonable amount. Kinko's could do it for a lot less, but they have that ability to put the price on it, and for a smaller organization like us, it's really inhibitive.
Well, my attorneys are here tonight. Pro bono, I think.
Great, now I'm going to get a bill for the text message.
You can see they're nicely dressed, and it's an expensive process and an extremely important one. And when you see the transformations that are taking place in the news industry, you want to make sure that one of the things that gets protected in all of this is our ability to pull all the levers that are necessary in the world of freedom of information. And I'm grateful to the work that the attorneys do in this, and I'm grateful that our employers make the resources available to keep the legal apparatus going, because the premise of your question is exactly right. Where you think that no one's paying attention and no one is prepared to act on it, you will see that government will revert to its natural instinct, which is to work within itself and to safeguard what it considers to be its private business, even if we think of it and if the law stipulates that it is the public business.
I don't see anybody back there. Yes, you want to go to that microphone back there so we can get it, the TV? Oh, I'm sorry, I should have.
I have a question, a comment. Is it possible, Marla, that the increase, the 15% increase in your viewership is because that many more people are able to stay home and watch television because they don't have jobs and are? And that's one comment. I mean, I assume that's what you're considering is much of the reason. The other thing is the notion of blogging and reading blogs and reading internet news has something to do with whether you have a computer or not. And I think it also has to do with your age. So are all those factors factored into your thinking about your panic about not covering all the bases all the time? And are you considering the fact that a lot of your news on your blogs is not being read by people who don't have computers or who don't choose to read their news on print? Would rather read it on a paper, or maybe don't read papers. I mean, I think there's some statistical numbers that ought to be talked about in a way.
We're doing it in radio for survival. I don't know how many, I won't make you raise your hands, but people who are here that are under the age of 30, statistically, they just do not listen to the radio anymore. Now, our average audience, our median age for public radio is 45. So we skew older anyway, but we don't have a younger audience, and we need to replace whatever audience we may be losing, and we're not going to be able to introduce the next generation of public radio through the radio because they're on their computers, they're on their iPods, their MP3 players. This is they're sharing music virally. They're not going to a radio to find their favorite music anymore, and that was the reason why we sometimes are focusing so heavily on the computer, because we could have the large audience that we have right now over the next decade or two die out. And if people aren't introduced to public media through their computers, it's not likely that they're going to find us just by flipping around and accidentally hitting the left end of the dial when they're in their car.
Yeah, we've been doing a fair amount of worrying here tonight, but I guess I want to say that for the news media and for readers and users, I think this is the golden age of storytelling. Now, we're able to use all these interactive devices and blogging and podcasting. They're new on the block, but it's a fabulous opportunity we have in this democracy of ours that we can pull together text and photos like in the old days, and audio. We all know audio. All of a sudden we marry some of this with video, which has been kind of a passive technology for 50 years, but now it's an active and an interactive technology. I think wherever you are as a consumer, you're able to tap into a greater range of information and more compelling than it has ever been before. And when we worry about the economics, it's in order to deliver this product that gets better every day. To be able to tell the story about a Brazilian auto plant on the one hand, and then bring it in with video on the other hand, and to make it available a full year later when it has a different context, this is fabulous stuff. And I think the blogging has a place. We have extraordinary active, almost compulsive blogs in some cases. I was worrying the other day about some technical limitation on how we move our blogs around, and I said, why don't we just put the most active blog in that position tomorrow? And somebody said to me, well, that might be the craft blog. The Detroit News, all that's going on in autos, the Lions are 0-12, and it's quite possible that our most popular blog is going to be a blog on home crafting. And my reaction to that was, that's terrific. Let the traffic take its place. And I think of it as an enormous opportunity for our news organizations, and I think of it as a spectacular opportunity for these 10-year-olds who are going to grow up with a totally different media than the one that I grew up with and which I love and embrace to this day.
I know we want to get in as many questions as possible, so we get if you keep your questions short and keep the answers succinct, we'll get in a few more.
This will be short. I get the feeling from listening to you, it's rather interesting. You've been absolutely phenomenal. But I get a feeling that we're not as interested in freedom of the press as we are in providing a saleable product. Any comments?
Well, that's a good question that has come up at other.
That is a good question, I'll say two things. There's a phenomenon around many cities where many nonprofit papers are popping up that are run by very small, very lean, energetic staffs. Fortunately for them, they're not beholden to large corporations that have investors that pay for our capital spending, that pay for people's salaries, and those are the realities of business. This is a business. We don't, a lot of us in the newsrooms cringe at the fact that it's a business when business things are brought up. But in order to survive, in order to thrive, in order to get more investment money, we do need to meet certain financial objectives, and we do market ourselves in many ways like a business. It's not something that people think in the newsroom is pretty, but it's a reality.
We're a commercial enterprise. We really are. And I don't think the two things have to be on polar opposite ends, though. I don't think that you have commercial enterprise here and freedom of the press here, that they're on opposite ends. I think that there are, on a daily basis, examples of where you can do the right thing and it can be good for business as well. And I'll use the weather example again if I can, in the sense that, and that may not be investigative reporting, but nonetheless, we invest millions of dollars in weather equipment, and when we have bad weather, people come to us to use it. We can charge more in those situations too. So it doesn't necessarily make it bad from that side. But I do appreciate what you're saying, and I've worked in the business long enough to know that when I talk to the seasoned veteran news directors, that there is a sense that things have changed, and there's just no question about it. It used to be that there were 3 or 4 TV stations in a market, and that was it. Cable TV was something that you had if you lived in a small community and couldn't get television over the air. Now you probably have 150 channels to choose from. In terms of like newspapers, and I can't speak on your behalf, but my guess would be that there is a tremendous more selection just because of the web. So the business model has changed, and I think the question for us is, how do we do the best job that we can do? And that's a subjective phrase, I get it, and what might be right for me isn't right for you, but at the same time, do it in a manner where we run a business that can continue to keep going.
I mean, since the penny press, the media has been a business, and you know, even in our situation, I don't have to turn a profit. I just have to break even. So every dollar I get, I'm allowed to spend. But I can't go over budget, and so we have to live within budgetary constraints as well. But I don't think there's been any major sea change. I mean, we go through cycles of government secrecy and government openness, and the efforts of the press to do public service and talk about the beauty of the First Amendment and the free press. But I don't know that there's been there's a lot more competition, but I don't think the philosophy of media as a business has changed in the last 100 years. I just wanted to say one other quick thing on FOIA, the freedom of information. In my experience, the difficulty with freedom of information is not with the press. Where that runs up against the wall is in the poor education, typically of civic officials who don't know what the law is. It's the person behind the counter who, when you go to ask for the documents, believes that they don't have to give them to you, and then the fight starts there. It's the civil servant or government employees often who don't know at all what the Freedom of Information Act laws are, and that's where we're running into difficulty.
Okay, you got a fairly short question there, sir.
My name is Tom Partridge. I'm a Democratic Party delegate in Washtenaw County, a professional independent writer, and a early Obama supporter here, wearing a campaign button with the portraits of FDR, John F. Kennedy, and Obama on them, all political leaders that have obviously been able to express themselves well and openly with the press. My question is whether you foresee, with the election of Senator Barack Obama to the presidency, there will be a new open and free press environment in the entire country. And to take this down to a local level, I'm particularly critical of the Michigan media for not giving us more insightful inside information on the business planning of the big three, as well as the unions, and including the insight into the inner sanctums of the boardrooms of what should be, for all but Chrysler, public corporations. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody, first of all, the first question was, do you think Obama will bring in the new millennium in freedom of information? I can tell you that what I hear from people who cover the White House, at least in the Bush administration, it has never been so tight, never been so difficult to get information out. Whether or not Mr. Obama says, hey, that's a pretty good deal, I think I'll keep that going, or not, I don't know. But
he wasn't called No Drama Obama on the campaign for no reason. I mean, they know exactly what they're doing, and all politicians now, certainly at the federal level, are coached and practiced. And I think lots of presidents go into the White House thinking that they're going to be open, and then they get burned once, or that first story comes and they suddenly realize we need to manage this. And I think anybody who's been through a campaign, by the time they get to the White House, they realize that they don't want to have a love affair with the press.
Anybody else want to get into that part, or this idea of coverage of the big three? Anybody want to jump in on that? Omari, you look like you Just dying to answer that question.
I'm not an autos expert per se, but I did work in our business department for a year and a half as an assistant editor and as a 5 years as a copy editor. I do understand what you're saying, but these are still fairly insular institutions that are very old, and they have set up certain barriers and protections within their own company. GM is notorious for being insular in nature. Our reporters do the best that they can to try to squeeze whatever information that they can out of these companies, but there are some boundaries that businesses have, and I can't fault them for maintaining some boundaries. They have financial information that's made public. I think we in the news have both reported and on initiatives that the automakers have had on parts of their business model, or parts of the things that they're trying to do to turn on their business. So I think that, of course, there's always information that we don't uncover that we could, and I think we're going to have to keep on hammering away at that.
Okay, I don't see anyone else up there. I have two questions I wanted to get to before we end up here. So quickly, John, you spent most of your career at the Associated Press as the top executive there. When I started this tour, I thought that the AP was going to be the winner out of all this, because as the newspapers cut back, what are they going to fill their news with? AP stories. But now you have Zell Millard saying he's going to drop AP. You've got the CNN saying they're going to come in there and compete with AP with a print service. Where do you think that is going? Do you have any feel for that?
AP was in a head-to-head competition with United Press International for so many years that indeed when I worked in Detroit AP in the 1970s, we were very much still in that day and age head-to-head in every respect with UPI. When UPI began to fade off into the sunset, people worried that AP, how would it prosper, and how would it hustle for the phone in a universe without competition? And of course, competition rushed in into the environment, and that became really an exciting era. Now we see a different era. AP is seeing some competition, perhaps from CNN bubble up, and it's seen some fears from newsroom budgeting that can we afford a service as extensive as AP, which operates in 100 different countries, and it's an expensive proposition. But the AP will adjust, I am certain. I've got a lot of confidence that the competition in the news industry, has always been a good thing. And AP has got a multimedia footprint. It has a video operation. It has a broadcast operation for radio, needless to say, photos and text. And you put that all together, it's a pretty compelling package. Does that mean that others won't come in? We saw Bloomberg come in from something you never heard of into a financial reporting phenomena. What do you call it? Anchor of the fortune of the mayor of New York. So this stuff happens. And as I say, AP likes competition, thrives on it, and I think AP will see new competition.
Before asking the last question, I want to thank the Ford Library for this. I want to thank our terrific panel. These are some very insightful answers here. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Aviva USA for financing this. And I want to tell you that there's a wonderful reception out here with some good, I can see the food there, I'm ready to go. But quickly, 5 years from now, where will we all be, do you think? I know where I'll be. I'm going to head
You'll be in Michigan, but we can't tell them. Yeah. But, I'm going to be working for Omari, I'm sure. He has the future. I have so much confidence.
Well, if we can survive through the next 5 years, I think we're going to be, most news organizations are going to be smaller. They're going to be forced to be more nimble. They're going to be very customer-oriented to see what news that the audience is looking for. And I think there's going to be less waste. It's going to have to be through necessity.
My boss isn't here, but I think we'll be bigger, actually. As you see, especially in some of the other communities outside of Detroit, with the newspapers being diminished, there's going to be something that's going to have to fill that void. And as a nonprofit, hopefully we can do that. We don't have a reporter. We have a tower, but not a reporter in Flint. I'd like to put one there. There are some other communities I'd like to be able to hire reporters in. It's going to depend on membership dollars, and if the whole economy in Michigan continues to do poorly, we can't count on those dollars being there. But 5 years from now, I think my hope is that we will be even more important in the communities that we serve, and that our newsroom will be bigger.
Marla, back cleanup here.
I will. I think we'll be more local. And by local, I don't mean necessarily Wayne County or Oakland County or Macomb or Washtenaw. I guess I probably mean more regional, because I think the notion of some consolidation occurring is going to happen, so that you might have a television station in Detroit that services Jackson and maybe even Lansing, for that matter. I think that we're going to be bigger as a result of that, and I think you're going to have a lot more choice of free over-the-air television. I know everyone's been seeing the commercials and the public service announcements about the digital transition, and this is coming on February the 17th. The one sort of headline that doesn't really get the headline is that television stations across the country are now starting to produce secondary digital channels. And come February the 17th, if you don't have it already, you're going to be able, with just a regular over-the-air television set, and a perfect example in Detroit right now is, I think we've gone from about 6 over-the-air stations to about 11 right now because of these digital sub-channels. Now, a lot of them are reruns of classic shows from the 50s and what have you, but I think they're good too. I agree. I love Gilligan's Island. I think that they'll get better, and I think that, so what you'll see more multiple platform, as we like to call it, more microsites on the web, and more regional television in terms of the big stick stations like WDIV.
And John, do you have
if I can just say one last thing, I think we'll be more mobile every month for 60 months. And by the 5-year mark, the news is going to come in on some handheld device, and we will be complementing it with most of the technologies represented here at the table.
Thank you very much. I sure appreciate it. As we say at the Press Club, we stand adjourned. Let's go to the bar.